Good morning, everybody. It's straight up at the top of the hour, so why don't we go ahead and get started. My name is Brian Cowie. I'm going to be going over kind of the recap and my own thoughts and the news and announcements for what we saw at the SharePoint conference this year that just happened last week out in Vegas. So uh, really when we're getting started here, we're really going to be going over the kind of categorizations around the modern improvements for things that are going on, OneDrive enhancements, the improvements that are happening from the mobile perspective, all the things that they finally released around SharePoint 2019, and then some of the pieces around the training services, the SharePoint framework, and SharePoint spaces. So in order to get started, let's just start going into all of the stuff that goes along with the modern improvements. So there was a lot of love around the modern UI and a lot of the things that maybe we have classically been missing inside of the modern UX once moving over from maybe the publishing page architecture. So a lot of the things got started around some of the news pieces. And one of the high-level pieces, as we've been seeing Microsoft start putting out a lot of these pre-baked flows that are available inside of the Flow launch panel, things like page approvals. One of those things was very much missing as an out-of-the-box type of approval flow for people wanting to have more kind of organizational or team-based news. So now you're going to be able to, right from the upper point here, be able to select and say, I want to submit this page basically for approval, and it'll already have a template available for us inside of Flow to get that going for us, which is extremely beneficial and something we've been waiting for a long time. The other big piece that they're starting to finally prove and show with us is metadata around our pages. Technically, we had the ability to add and manage metadata for our modern pages in the past. We would just have to go to the site pages library and mess with it from the kind of edit properties pane there. And it was, for all intents and purposes, as a content author, it was very much a pain for managing. Now we're going to have the page details area that allows us quick and easy access to be able to view and edit the properties that are associated with any page. As you can see in that screenshot that was basically taken from the keynote, things like being able to have an activity or a region or being able to select a role for that perspective, really classifying our pages so that we can use that as individual pieces of data farther down, if it's either through news roll-ups, if it's through search, whatever it is. Now we have that capability for content authors to be able to manage that metadata in an easier fashion. One of the things that I've personally been waiting for is a lot of adjustments to the new modern search interface, where they really introduced kind of two different customizations that we're going to be able to start doing, even though it was a little light on details as far as how it's actually going to be done. But the first one is really around including custom sources inside of your search box from an extensibility perspective. What this means is now from the main search box that you see on SharePoint Home or the Office 365 homepage, we're going to be able to highlight maybe initial items from a SharePoint list or from other kind of content sources right around there, as well as being able to start modifying the actual search results, finally bringing back kind of the filters inside of modern search and giving us the capability for managing that in various ways. So we're going to be able to start bringing back our search verticals and our kind of organizational drill through from a search perspective, which has been lacking from the modern search experience for a very, very long time. Then there's a lot of other things for general, kind of modern improvements that didn't necessarily have screenshots associated with it, but I wanted to make sure to call them out. Things like finally being able to have new scheduling or bringing back kind of support for audience targeting. That's really going to go a long ways with the new filtering capabilities in the news web part. Currently, right now, the news web part basically says, I'm going to show all news pages in the order that they were received inside of your given site or inside of all the sites inside of your hub. But now we're going to be able to even say, you know what, maybe only bring back news that's filtered based off of a particular region or a particular audience, which is going to be very, very beneficial. I saw one kind of screen capture of that once at least inside of the actual conference itself. Another enhancement to news, because we all love news and we all need to deal with news in some way, shape, or form, is being able to mark specific sites inside of your SharePoint Online instance as organizational news. What this will be able to do is it'll allow you to kind of pin or highlight news articles that are coming from maybe more authoritative areas. So if it is something coming from HR, maybe you want to make sure that's getting flagged in a higher way, or if it's coming from kind of an executive corner, things like that, that you want to make sure that are highlighted in a different fashion. We're going to have the ability to highlight those and target those effectively. They decided to start rolling out a couple new web parts because everybody, I guess, needed that weather web part back. So that's going to be inside of there, as well as the ability to even drop a web part on a page to view and modify the actual metadata without maybe necessarily needing to go to that page details action itself. Are going to be different things that are available. One of the really nice pieces that I saw was also the whole hub site concept, now being able to layer approvals on top of the hub site associations. That's really going to allow us to, right now, we have the ability to say only these users have the ability to join to certain hub sites, but now we can keep that maybe more wide open and just have an approval process instead of hiding or showing visibility to those given hub sites. And then the last thing, at least on this page here, are really around list updates. And Chris McNulty in the content services section of the keynote was able to show kind of the real-time list updates that were able to happen when he added a location field. And then other individuals were basically working behind the scenes to update those columns. And without having to refresh the page, he started seeing the location information for individual list items just start popping up. So no longer do we need to make sure that we are forcing our users to refresh their page to make sure that they have the most recent updates. Those real-time list updates are going to be coming soon to a SharePoint Online instance near you. But wait, that's not it. For other kind of modern improvements in the past, they have been doing a lot of integrations with other third-party services inside of the Microsoft Office 365 space, such as Power Apps and Flow, and they're starting to expand upon those integrations as we go through. So the first one that they were showing was being able to link to and create a task inside of Planner directly from a list item. So the screenshot that shows here was from the keynote where basically being able to create an individual task based off of that given project and being able to set, assign tos and deadlines and what board it basically goes on, but having that direct integration so that you don't necessarily need to create a flow to be able to initiate the creation of that. You can do it direct in line from the actual list itself. Or things like being able to finally analyze some of our data that's inside of our lists. And an argument can be made if our list item data should really be kind of our system of records and stuff like that. But now they're giving us the ability to actually do, proactive analytics with Power BI just on top of our actual list data and being able to see that in line. So the insights action that shows up on the action bar is going to be able to, bring you those graphs and the charts around maybe some of the data that you want to be able to see at a given list perspective. They've already started to kind of layer out additional enhancements with Flow to be able to tap into some of the cognitive services pieces that have been available in Azure for a little while to really start performing things like sentiment analysis on text to be able to determine if it's a negative response or a positive response. Those are all going to be things that are starting to make their way out and be able to utilize in a Flow perspective as shown from that kind of social screenshot itself there. And then finally, the bringing back of being able to paste stuff directly from Excel. When they showed this during the keynote itself, it actually got a decent amount of applause, which was nice. But being able to see and be able to bring in content that already exists. We already have a lot of data, directly from Excel, but just highlighting it, pasting it in, and then if there are fields that were not available inside of the list, it'll even auto-create those fields and suggest to you maybe what types they were. During the actual keynote itself, I know it was basically showing a currency field that it auto-recommended to be able to switch that just from a regular number field to a currency field, and that column wasn't available or wasn't pre-created for you inside of the actual list itself when it actually got started. So more and more integrations into a lot of these tools. As we continue with some of the integrations, we talked about one of the things with Flow is that much like in some of the SharePoint Designer workflows we were able to do before, now you're going to be able to both import and export our flows from Visio, so we can work on those offline. We can start to show them in a way that maybe makes more sense from a business user perspective and start identifying what we need to do prior to actually building it directly inside of the Flow service. But then being able to import those or export those out is going to be wildly beneficial for us as we get through, as seen from that screenshot. And then another one of the things that got a good reaction itself is really being able to create lists in a little bit new user experience. So if you're creating a list based off of Excel, like we kind of at least talked about a little bit before, or being able to have kind of more company approved templates or even from previous lists. So the example that's at least on here is being able to say, you know what, we have kind of this travel project list, and it's going to recommend that it's going to create a project name, ID, manager, project type, and it is recommending milestone, but I don't necessarily need to choose that. I have the ability to say, yeah, I'm not going to use that, or I can create even new columns. And having the ability to kind of pre-templatize in the modern UI different types of lists is going to be important, at least for our end users. Another integration coming on down for Microsoft Forms, right? A quick and easy survey and quiz tool. But one of the things that was lacking for a while was file upload support. So finally, they're actually going to bring a control for file uploads into Microsoft Forms. It obviously has some direct dependencies on where that location of the form is going to be. So I believe initially that form needs to be created and associated with an Office 365 group, and members of that group are going to have the ability to upload a file to there. But then they are going to be working on anonymous file upload controls. But of course, that has various kind of security ramifications and things that are involved there. So that's definitely later on the line as far as what's coming in. But a really good improvement or benefit as a control that's been wanting, at least for a while, inside of Microsoft Forms. And then showing off some of the kind of AI perspective. So they talked about this at last Ignite, but showing it once again for being able to have images automatically scanned for recognition, being able to scan that receipt and start seeing, yep, that's where I took it, or being able to have some of the media services OCR content or the location of those images automatically added, as actual metadata inside of SharePoint that we can utilize for things like search or filtering or anything like that, which is beneficial. And then one of the last things, at least from a modern improvement perspective, being able to directly from our SharePoint group site is being able to add that basically and add the Microsoft Teams functionality to it. So we already have the ability, if we are the owner of that group, to be able to add Teams functionality to that from the Teams interface. This is bringing that in the lower left-hand corner of that screenshot, bringing that functionality directly inside of SharePoint. So if I'm the owner, if I want to be able to mess around and add Teams functionality, maybe I just created this as a modern Teams site from the SharePoint homepage, I have the ability to now Teamify basically that site and add the additional concepts that come along with Microsoft Teams. So those are at least a lot of the general modern improvements. If we roll over into OneDrive overall, a lot of them started from a security perspective. So the first thing with OneDrive is having the ability to kind of require password protected links at an administration level so that as links are going out, that we can ensure that certain areas require passwords for people to be able to come in. And then also having that block download area to be able to prevent information leakage. As you can see, at least on that screenshot, having those at least in place can really help us from a security perspective, since OneDrive is a quick and easy usage to be able to start sharing and adding content with everybody around the world. Another nice thing for administrators is this known folder move. When I first heard about it, I was like, okay, what is this really about? But some administrators and some organizations really like to be able to say, you know what, we're not going to be able to really change all of our users' kind of work scenarios, and they're still going to throw things on the desktop. They're going to automatically save things in their documents and their pictures, right, in their normal kind of user area. Now we're going to be able to, with the provisioning of OneDrive, is be able to say, you know what, we want to be able to automatically redirect people's desktops, documents, pictures, basically known folder locations for a given user during provisioning, so that as people don't need to change their work patterns in order to start leveraging the features inside of OneDrive and inside of all of the cloud services themselves. There's other tools like that, like the auto mount team sites for sync is going to be something that's going to be extremely interesting to see, as people right now have to selectively, per their individual library or individual Office 365 groups, specify, I want to synchronize this so that I have access to it right away. Now that's going to be able to highlight and identify kind of the auto mounting is really what it comes down to, that it's going to be available for them without the user having to do anything. The addition of external sharing usage patterns with Excel and Power BI is going to be nice to really see how people are utilizing or not utilizing, right, the system itself. And then the other thing that's kind of been lacking inside of the SharePoint space for a while, right now when a user is offboarded from Office 365, their OneDrive for Business site gets delegated rights to their manager, who's ever identified inside of Azure Active Directory. Now we're also going to be able to have the ability to transfer the ownership of that OneDrive during offboarding to other people. So if you think about like your service desk or your HR team that need to go through some of this content, instead of it needing to be on the manager's shoulders, we have that ability to have this additional ownership of OneDrive during user offboarding, which is beneficial now instead of always relying on that one individual person itself. So that will look into mobile. This kind of crosses the space between OneDrive and mobile itself. For those that have used the Office Lens, they're actually starting to package that concept, that scanning experience directly now inside of the actual SharePoint app. So the actual icon even still looks like Office Lens, as you can see at least in that screenshot there, but being able to automatically start that scanning experience and go from there. Also, a lot of people have utilized the kind of auto upload of photos into OneDrive for Personal, at least before, and they've heard from their constituency that people want that in OneDrive for Business. So they're basically adding the support for kind of auto photo upload directly up into OneDrive for Business here as well, from the OneDrive app and the SharePoint app from that perspective. And then they're kind of simplifying the tabs that are available inside of the SharePoint app with this Find tab that gives you that kind of quick access to either your frequent sites, the people you work with, what are some of the highlighted quick access areas that you need to be able to go into. So trying to simplify the places that you need to go in the actual app experience itself. And then they're going to be adding push notifications now that we're going to be able to mention people inside of page comments. And even if people are liking your news and announcements, you have the ability to have those push notifications starting to go to you from a mobile improvement perspective there as well. So all that so far has been online, and all that's well and good, but they did finally release the covers, at least on SharePoint 2019. Really the kind of starting point for a lot of this stuff is they've taken the lessons learned from Office 365 and are starting to bring them down on-prem, right? So if it's finally now bringing down the modern UI for pages, lists, and libraries, giving us those modern team and communication site templates to be able to start utilizing those, the SharePoint homepage, support now for files on demand, all of these things have been available inside of Office 365 for some time. My general mantra on this is SharePoint 2019 is probably going to look a lot like what SharePoint Online was at the beginning of the year 2018. So we're not going to get things yet like hub sites or any of these new kind of organizational news or anything like that, but we are starting to get, the SharePoint framework extension support, the next-gen client, sync client support, so that we don't have to use the good old, groove.exe client. From an administrative perspective, one of the things that finally made their way in was the SMTP outbound authentication. Currently, in any previous version of SharePoint, we had to be able to send that basically all the emails from SharePoint anonymously to some sort of an anonymous relay that was going to accept it. Now we have the ability to enter in credentials so that it can actually be authenticated SMTP traffic going out. And then the last thing to be able to highlight in there is some adjustments to the actual recycle bin. Currently for the recycle bin, if you deleted it, you can see it from the first stage recycle bin. But let's say that somebody else you were working with deleted the actual content. You didn't, A, know that that person deleted it, nor did you have the ability to get it back unless you were a site collection administrator. Now, anybody who is a site member at the first stage recycle bin will be able to actually see content that they have access to as a member perspective inside of the recycle bin as well. So no longer do you need to be stalled. If a colleague of yours has deleted something, you actually have the ability to even restore it back. And vice versa, they can see if you did it as well. So there are some adjustments at least coming to the recycle bin. But overall, it's really, once again, taking that information known from SharePoint Online in Office 365 and bringing those down to an on-premise perspective. The big thing about this is right in the summer of 2018, which those of which that are in Minnesota feel like it's already summer already, but the preview is going to be coming out here in the summer, hopefully here in a couple months. And then the release, the production release or general availability of SharePoint 2019 sometime here in the fall in 2018. So for those who are still on premise, they haven't fully forgotten about you. You're just going to be behind the scenes at least a little bit on what capabilities that are there, at least currently at the general availability release. So then let's get into one of the announcements that was actually kind of off the radar for me, at least initially, was this announcement of Microsoft Training Services. This wasn't something that I was expecting at all, but what was really, really nice about it is now Microsoft is going to proactively deliver up-to-date content directly to your internet via basically modern web parts. As an administrator, having the ability to choose if you only want to have selected pieces, so that if you haven't rolled out certain services to the masses, you can make sure that that training content isn't available through the actual services itself. And users have the ability to build those kind of training playlists and sharing content basically to others to really consume the content in the way that they want to. Along with the actual main content itself, that they're also going to be rolling out additional kind of adoption guidance and best practice stuff along with this whole training services. You can choose to use or not use that if you want. But not only are they delivering you just flat out content that you can use throughout your organization, but they're also going to be giving us tools to actually identify how people are using it and measuring how people are utilizing any of the actual tools delivered through the actual training services, which is extremely interesting. All this stuff is going to be powered by Azure Hosted Content Store, and the best part about it is you don't have to buy anything new, right? There's no additional training resources or packages that you are required for purchase, at least for what they said right now. So if you're interested, you can actually sign up for the pilot waitlist. The link is at least right there. And they announced that the next phase for that, the next expanded pilot is going to basically be in July of 2018. So if you're interested in utilizing that or getting your hands on what some of that training material is going to be, go ahead and actually fill out the Microsoft form, which is basically on that pilot waitlist link that's right there. So if we move over to kind of some of the developer-y things, there was, Veza was up during the actual keynote itself and talked about a bunch of different things, some of which were talked about at Build, a few weeks prior. But the first thing, like global deployment of application extensions. For those that have started to work inside the modern UI and want to have maybe a more consistent top or bottom navigation that goes across every single site, regardless if it's joined to a hub site or not, you've always had to individually register those actions at each and every site. Now we're going to have the ability to register that action once at our app catalog and have it available across our entire tenancy, which is going to be great for our consistent headers and our consistent footers, regardless of wherever we are. And they showed off, a global kind of footer navigation solution that was at least inside of there. The other big one was if you're already starting your investment in SharePoint Framework for web parts, that's going to pay off because you don't even have to write it differently. You can deploy your SharePoint Framework web parts just like you are today pretty soon and be able to utilize those and create new tabs inside of Teams that will actually surface that exact same content. This is just being able to show how the SharePoint framework is starting to become significantly more than just SharePoint focused. It's being able to develop our applications and our web parts in a single framework and being able to start leveraging them across the ecosystem, which is extremely beneficial. The next one, we already had the ability to do column formatting, right? So highlighting certain columns based off of different metadata values or whatever it is. Now they're going to be bringing back full level, row level formatting so that if you want to show the row completely different inside of a custom list, you'll be able to do that in a very similar pattern to what we were able to do inside of the column formatter. And then one of the nice things, if you're really trying to get a feel for what this modern UI is like and starting to get a feel for what's kind of involved, the Patterns and Practices team released the SharePoint Starter Kit that you can basically use in any single Office 365 tenant, and it'll spin up a bunch of different sites. It'll add a bunch of different even custom web parts inside of the modern user interface, some application extensions. It'll provision some pages. It'll provision a bunch of things inside of the modern UI so that A, you can see how you might want to leverage a lot of the same patterns itself, but also gives you a starting point instead of a blank sheet of paper if you're getting started in the modern UI and you don't necessarily know where to start. So that part's good. And then a few other things from a dev perspective. Supposedly, we're going to be utilizing the SharePoint framework for extending that modern search experience, like we talked about at least a little bit inside of the kind of modern innovation area. And then one of the happy things that I was able to see right now, we have the ability to create site designs and site scripts so that we can have kind of new site templates based on the modern and team communication sites. But now we're also going to have the ability to run various site scripts when a site joins a hub site. What this gives us the ability to do is say, hey, maybe we want to make sure that when this site gets added to a hub, we want to automatically register that site URL inside of the hub navigation, or we want to create a standard list or library and set of content types for any site that is joined to that hub. That's one thing that they announced. One thing that also will be interesting to see is if they also give us the ability to apply site scripts or site designs when disassociation also happens. So we'll see how all that kind of comes to play. And then the last thing for the SharePoint framework was really the addition of dynamic data sources to share information about the page or about what's going on with other components. And the reason why I say other components, it's because it's not just other SharePoint modern web parts, but you're also going to be able to share that information with application extensions as well. So if you are going to start being able to create more mashup pages that can show a lot of this stuff, it's going to give us that ability to really start pulling all of that data together. So then the next piece is really around I think the announcement that almost nobody really saw coming, and a lot of people are still trying to wrap their head around, and that's SharePoint Spaces. So what I'm going to do is, at least for those who haven't seen anything about this, this is a little intro video for what SharePoint Spaces is, and then we'll talk about it here in a little bit.
More than ever, dynamic, impactful content is critical to the modern workplace. Introducing SharePoint Spaces, letting anyone create mixed reality experiences where data, documents, and files can be seen in immersive environments from any device. Create custom spaces where you can visualize and manipulate data in real time. Discover and interact with objects in 3 dimensions. Explore company knowledge, making onboarding more engaging. And experience vibrant, expansive 3D environments right at your desk. SharePoint Spaces lets anyone experience content in new and exciting ways, empowering us all to achieve even more.
So SharePoint Spaces is one of those things where at first look it's like, okay, that's kind of interesting, but trying to start figure out what the practical applications of this. I mean, in general, I look at the announcement around SharePoint Spaces as really starting to bring the kind of 3-dimensional space that you would need a high level of development expertise on, at least in the past. We're trying to bring that to the masses. So the way in which they talked about it was, we as Microsoft had the ability to really lower the bar for entry around communication and collaboration with the use of SharePoint and how we're doing it today. With what they're hoping with SharePoint Spaces is, once again, lowering that bar of entry for being able to create mixed reality experiences with easy drag and drop kind of concepts that we've come to know and utilize inside of the actual SharePoint space. So practical experience, I think it'll be interesting based on industry or organization, right, on how that's going to potentially be used. But I like that the team itself is pushing that envelope, right? They're really looking to see what's next and how, even if it's not exactly what people need right now, is how can that potentially get in front of the horse, right? To be able to start looking at how people may want to be able to start interacting with these devices and with these concepts, at least in the future. So this is a lot of information. The one thing that I struggled trying to find was decent really roadmaps on content that was really going to come out. So there were two formal roadmaps that kind of came into play. One was around content services. So this was where they, extremely called out that we already have things like that Word SharePoint property pane, bulk metadata updates, content approval, custom action inside of Flow, but then starting to see how things are coming down later on, right? So like in Q3, things like flow triggers for file analysis and cognitive services, or supposedly, right, Q3 for page management for tags and templates and targeting and approval looks really, really nice. And then the other thing that was kind of interesting to see, finally, the one mention of document sets. So supposedly modernizing the actual document set, since that's still been in the classic UI for a long time, as well as being able to start utilizing Flow for file level permissions, as well as starting to leverage Power Apps for libraries, are things that were intriguing for the content services. And then it went one further on the business app side, going at least a little bit deeper. A lot of the things in Q2 are already out there, right? So for SharePoint Listen Teams or the SharePoint migration tool support, that's already out there. But seeing this is where they identified kind of the Forms file upload for Microsoft Forms to group members for things that are going on, or live updates and lists. In the automation area, a lot of that stuff is already inside of there, and it looks like, coming soon to a theater near you, the whole Visio for designing flows is very, very soon. But then as we look farther and farther down, things like, using Flow to govern site creation for communication sites. So it's interesting that they don't have anything for team sites, but they do for communication sites. I'm assuming that's basically for approvals, right? But then, the flow actions for permissions, once again, flow approvals with actually being able to have attachments, additional stuff for Power Apps and Power BI also coming to play. But during the actual keynote itself, if you were there in person, you were able to see a lot of the slides that they had up. If you were trying to attend the virtual summit remotely, it was much harder to get an idea for what was going on. But in the background, they had individual items that were basically listed and kind of when on their high-level roadmap things were going to go on. So the first set that I grouped together were all the things that, they highlighted that you have the ability to do today. So if it's using OneDrive files on demand, all the SharePoint news stuff, including the connector for Teams, leveraging those communication sites, being able to group them together with hub sites, starting to use that cognitive sentiment analysis with Flow, using those SharePoint framework extensions to provide that consistent user experience across modern, and then things like the OneDrive file restore, GDPR dashboard, and the SharePoint migration tool are things that you already have the capability that they maybe talked about at the SharePoint conference, but you can use and leverage right now. And then they mentioned things that were coming soon. And literally they always said available soon. So things like this are going to be, you're going to be needing to anticipate things like at mentioning being available in page comments, or the kind of updated file sharing experience across everywhere. One of the nice things finally is having a new modern document library web part that actually gives us the flexibility to do things that maybe were lacking, at least in the previous one. The new Files tab in Teams, full pages in Teams, the whole scanning piece that we talked about inside of the actual mobile place, but then soon for being able to tag pages with metadata, right? And what that means is bringing the user experience to our content authors to be able to manage that. We already have the ability to add metadata to those today, but then having that out-of-the-box page approval pieces, having that global SharePoint framework extension deployment support, and then the connected web parts and extensions, as well as being able to deploy our SharePoint framework web parts into tabs, are all things that are coming soon, at least identified from their slides during the actual keynote itself. And then the next stage that they had were things that were coming this summer. So a lot of the mobile application updates, right? The kind of new Find tab, the inclusion of, the kind of auto upload of images support, all of that kind of stuff is going to be coming sometime in the summer. We already talked about the pilot for the Microsoft training services, and then the preview for SharePoint 2019 is all what we should be expecting in the summer. And when they say summer, I would anticipate a lot of this to potentially be, where soon is probably going to be more like June, July, summer probably August, September, and then we had later this year. I'm anticipating a lot of this stuff in later this year is what they're targeting to try to finish prior to Ignite, basically in the fall. So things like, that camera upload for OneDrive for Business, the organizational news, audience targeting, the site designs or site scripts for Hub Site Association, all the search extensibility pieces that they were a little fuzzy on, row formatting, the new list creation, quick list editing, all the real-time updates, and the analysis with Power BI. So I wanted to group these things together in a way that you can understand when you need to start preparing for where some of these news and announcements that were coming out of Ignite or out of the SharePoint conference. The best place, of course, to be able to get up-to-date information on all this stuff is going to be the Office 365 Message Center, as well as the Office 365 Roadmap, which is going to give you the up-to-date information for when they're starting to actually be ready to roll this stuff out. So that's the primary information that I have today. The one thing that I at least wanted to, really call out, just to kind of bring this home to what Avtex sees as our customer experience message here, is this continues to reinforce to me that SharePoint continues to be that go-to platform for engaging in a rich employee experience, whether you're on, in the cloud or you're on-prem. Microsoft continues to evolve the modern user experience, and they bring integrations across the entire Microsoft stack, including Teams and Power BI and Planner, Flow, Power Apps, and more. The SharePoint product team, they're pushing that envelope by showing their innovation chops by introducing SharePoint Spaces, which, like I said before, brings that ease of use drag and drop concepts that we're used to building mixed reality experience to the masses. So I hope you enjoyed our session here today. We wanted to make sure that we were highlighting our next webinar series is going to be a 3-part series with Neil Iverson and myself, where we're really going to be focusing on Power Apps and Flow and how you can use those tools from a basic perspective all the way down to integrating those across the Office 365 suite and building a consistent middleware set of services between things like Office 365 and Dynamics or other SaaS applications. So I thank you for your time, and hopefully you have a good day. Thanks.